I started. Mm-hmm.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, The Global Guide Standard, Understanding Total Giving by Corporations. My name is Jenny Jung, and I am the Senior Associate of the Evaluation and Data Insights team at CECP. I wanted to invite everyone here, whether you are new to CECP, whether you are new to our annual Giving in Numbers survey, or whether you have been a long time an engaging company, I welcome you because this will be an exciting and important webinar telling you about some of the changes that we have. Just about CECP, for those who are not aware, CECP is a nonprofit coalition of CEOs united in the belief that societal improvement is an essential measure of business performance. Since its founding in 1999, CECP has grown to a movement of more than 150 CEOs of the world's largest companies across all industries. And we also offer participating companies one-on-one consultation, networking events, exclusive data, media support, and case studies on corporate engagement, as well as special webinars on topics such as today's. I'd also like to introduce my two guest speakers who are colleagues of the Evaluation and Data Insights team at CECP. We've got Carmen Perez, who is the director of our team.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have Andre Solorzano, who is the manager of our Data Insights activities.
Hi, how are you?
So as we start today's webinar, I wanted to give you an overview of what to expect. First things first, we have a 30-minute presentation, and we will also have a 15-minute Q&A. But please do not wait. Feel free to submit your questions anytime, and you can do so by typing them in on the lower right-hand corner of your menu on your screen. Everyone is muted for the webinar, so we will not be actually able to dial anyone in, but we'll be keeping an eye on the questions and the chat function. And then also, the recording for this will be available next week. Now, the question of what is the Global Guide Standard? We will be spending the next half hour reviewing it, as well as giving you an overview of how to report it in our annual Giving in Numbers survey. And for those who are already familiar with our survey, covering what's different, what's the same, and then what are some of the benefits in now utilizing this specific standard. And of course, a very important question of why this is relevant and why this is so important for the field. And then with the remaining 15 minutes, we will be spending time answering your questions. And I see that already we do have a question coming in. The emails, I will be sending an email directly to all of those who have attended, and the link to this webinar will be available on CECP's website. So with that, let's jump right in. The question is, what is it? What is the Global Guide Standard? Well, CECP has a valuation guide that defines a range of standards when thinking about corporate giving and the range of corporate societal engagement activities. CECP uses the Global Guide Standard for determining which recipients to include when reporting corporate charitable giving in the annual Giving in Numbers survey, and helps define what companies should count in what we call total giving, or likewise total contributions. And it is important to note that this will be the only and primary criteria that our survey will be using from here on. There are 3 criteria for giving to count when reporting to the annual Giving in Numbers survey. First, recipients must be formally organized, and second, they must have a charitable purpose, and third, they must never distribute profits. This standard helps because it improves reporting and benchmarking for global giving. And importantly, it also helps us compare apples to apples, which I will be talking about in a little bit. If your company has previously participated in this survey, the good news is that the Global Guide Standard is an expansion of which recipients to include when reporting corporate charitable giving. The transition of what to count in total giving actually began a couple of years ago in 2012 and 13, And during that transition, 90% of companies reported that moving from our previous definition to the global guide criteria did not affect their total giving number. And we also saw that in last year's survey as well. So with that, I'd like to ask the expert, Andre here, to share a finding from our giving in numbers and how this is related to our global guide standard.
Thank you, Jeannie. So having a common standard for giving is also important in terms of thinking of international giving. So what we have here is a chart that we got from Giving in Numbers 2015 edition, and we know that companies are growing their businesses globally, also are their decisions. With such growth comes changes in managerial control of how grantees are chosen. What we can see from this chart is that in the lower hand side of the chart, we have how is the managerial decision made in terms of choosing the grantees for international giving. So in terms of choosing international end recipients, we see that basically half of the companies make that decision in their headquarters. But we must not forget that actually almost the other half, 45%, are led or co-led by their local management. So in almost half of this company, the decisions of the grantees are made at the local level. So in terms of having a common standard of who we're considering for grantees and recipients, that is why having a common standard becomes more important than ever.
Thank you, Andre. And I should note for all of the participants here, this chart is directly from our 2015 edition of Giving in Numbers survey, and it actually helps pinpoint the fact that companies are growing businesses globally, and this is really important. Now, some of you may be asking, where in the survey will I see this question? And I will respond by saying, what an excellent question. Some of you may already know that the survey has 6 major components. Now, across the 6 different components, question 2A is where they ask to please provide the value of your company's total contributions. Please respond to the question by applying the 3 global criteria, but also keep in mind that you should apply the global guide standards throughout the entire survey. Now, earlier I did mention that this global guide standard is important for comparing apples to apples. And the motivation behind the global guide is to ensure that this apples-to-apples comparison can happen for benchmarking. Improving the way you report is also something that we know companies are striving to achieve, and that's a business function. So with that, I'd like to ask you to picture an apple in your mind for a minute. I'm willing to bet that everyone had different images of apples. Just like the images on your screen, there is a diversity in the sizes, the flavors, the colors of apples. I'm also willing to bet that we can all agree 2 of these images on this screen are not an apple, because we understand the definition of an apple. And for those that might still need some help, I'm referring to the soccer ball and the orange. This helps us to ensure that we're talking about apples to apples, or whatever the topic may be, with the shared understanding and the definition of the item itself. So how does this translate to comparing total giving to total giving? Well, that's our objective here, to ensure that we're all rallying on the same definition. If I were to ask you to report your company's total giving in fiscal year 2015, what would your answer be? Let's look at the images of these different total giving amounts. Can you identify what's the differences of what's included or excluded in these numbers? How are we defining total giving anyways? Well, CECP as a standard setter has done this in many ways, and this is something we've done for a while. Now with the Global Guide Standard, we're simply saying to companies, the public, other stakeholders who feel and other stakeholders so that they can feel confident that when they see total giving numbers being reflected in a CCP finding or trend, they know what's included. Now, I'd like to ask Carmen about the background of the Global Guide Standard and why it's so important and how it got to where it is today.
Thank you so much, Ginny. Actually, those slides that you just went through on the apples to apples and comparing total giving are an excellent lead-in because you are really sort of talking about the motivation behind why CCP, together with Deloitte and together with so many companies and practitioners, went on this journey. It's the first time in history that there is a global standard. As we began to think back in 2011 around our total giving definition, what needs were related to that, we discovered that there wasn't actually some place to turn if we sought to update CCP's valuation guidance to make sure that it was truly global. So the valuation guide that Ginny referred to early on in the presentation has the definition of total giving being 501c3s or the international equivalent. 501c3 is, of course, a U.S. definition. Together with some great leadership from Deloitte and Barry Salzberg, who was the CEO there at that time, CCP joined forces to try to create that common standard, that common definition. It's so important because it increases the quality of the benchmarking that CCP equips companies with and that you can use to take into a board meeting and really know that those numbers are truly credible and something your board of directors and your teams can make decisions upon. Secondly, there's that larger mission around transparency. As we see growth, KPMG reports that CSR reports are now just truly the standard that all companies are producing them. We've got GRI, we've got SASB. Transparency is front and center. So when companies and when the public, when different stakeholders want to know what's included in total giving, there was an international consensus to create that definition. And so that's really what the Global Guide to What Counts and the companion piece developing the Global Guide produced for the industry. So both of these are on CCP's website. You'll see that the one on the left, the Global Guide to What Counts, with the gray cover and the blue globe, is really a short piece to give you just the Global Guide standard. That's the product of all of this research. But you can also look at developing the Global Guide to really see the history, the rigorous process that went into creating this standard. We couldn't take it lightly that there wasn't a global definition, so 17 countries were studied in depth with some international tax experts looking at the social sector in those markets to really produce and fill that gap that now we're so excited to see in this coming year be a true transition in CCP standard.
Thank you, Carmen. It's great to hear about the trajectory, the path, and the progress that this initiative has taken the last couple of years. Now, let's review in detail the three criteria that we've already mentioned so many times. The standard is concise, and there's just 3 points. So the purpose of this was to make it not overly complicated and rather easy for practitioners to use and apply. First criteria is that the recipient must be formally organized. And second, the recipient must exist for a charitable purpose. And third, the recipient must never distribute profits. I do also want to note the plus signs between the 3 criteria to indicate that a grantee must meet all 3 criteria. So let's talk about the first one, must be formally organized. It's quite easy and simple that the organization must have an organizational identity, and they must have a legal entity by the standard of the country in which it is headquartered. And we say that it really is any valid legal form, and for our organizations in the U.S., it is not limited to 501c3 status, which is specifically for the U.S. IRS designation. And then another thing to note is that government recipients are excluded with the exception of schools. Government or state-run recipients are excluded, and this was part of the process that was started, as Carmen had mentioned. And going back to this idea of apples-to-apples benchmarking, it helps us ensure that we're aligned and understand what's included in the total giving figures. The second criteria is that the organization must exist for a charitable purpose. And it's important that with the standard, we're distinguishing charitable purpose from any other purpose. And that it includes recipients whose institutional purpose falls within one or more of the majority purpose and activity categories that are defined by the ICNPO, which is spelled out to be the International Classification of Nonprofit Organizations. This is actually a global standard that is already endorsed and promoted by the UN for many years now. To take a look at what is included, I won't go through all of them, as all of the slides here and the materials will be available, but you'll see that we've got a full range of activities that are included, and we'd like to hear from you if you see that there are any that might need an extra detail or that you are giving to certain categories that are not reflected here. Another thing that I'd like to point out is some exclusions. With this new standard, what is not included are political parties and organizations, business and professional associations, unions, and religious congregations and associations. There is one exception, though, to the religious institution, which is that as long as a company is funding an activity that is considered charitable or has a charitable purpose, even if it is to a religious institution, it will be counted. So some examples are soup kitchens that are run by a church, a homeless shelter run by a mosque, a pre-kindergarten program run by a synagogue. Even though those are all religious institutions, because the purpose in which the grant is going is considered charitable, it would be included in the Global Guide Standard.
Ginny, I see a question from the audience here. What if your matching gift program allows employees to give to religious organizations?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so I will actually talk about that later on in towards the end of the slide, where because we are talking about total giving, which is about corporate and company giving, any sort of giving by the employee is captured in a different section of the survey, which we actually call philanthropic leverage. So when talking about total giving, that would not be represented here, and especially because we're talking about employee giving. Thank you for that question. Going to the third criteria, that the recipient must never distribute profits. We want to also point out that what we're doing is distinguishing non-commercial motives, and that finances should be managed to produce charitable benefit. Now, one thing to note is the emphasis is on the distribution of the commercial motives, not the profits, meaning that we know that nonprofit organizations must retain and earn revenue. So that's not what we would consider to be a commercial motive. And again, the emphasis is about ensuring that the funding is not going back to a shareholder or being distributed to individuals. Oh, and you know, we just received a question about asking about social enterprises and B Corps. Really good question. We do acknowledge that there are really interesting work that companies are doing on the social entrepreneurship front. However, according to this standard, because B Corps and social enterprises are profit-generating entities, they would not be counted here. I do encourage that if there are such giving within your company's current strategies, to please report that separately in the notes section of the survey, or to reach out to CCP and let's discuss this further, as we are interested in knowing and that we've been tracking this separately for some time now. Now let's talk about what's the difference between the existing the previous standard and now the Global Guide Standard. As you know, CCP has a long history of corporate giving, valuation, setting the standards, and helping companies think about corporate societal engagement. So first, Carmen has mentioned this earlier, that the 501c3 status and definition is something that we are no longer doing, and this is because we want to ensure that the IRS, the 501c3 status, as it applies to just the U.S., is not limiting for companies who are working globally, who are working in different markets, and that other countries may not have that same criteria. Secondly, this is on your screen, a screenshot of the National Taxonomy of Exempt Entities. That's NTEE definitions that are gathered by the Urban Institute and National Center for Charitable Statistics. It offers a definitive classification system, for nonprofit organizations who are recognized as tax exempt under the the Internal Revenue Code. And it has been used by many companies to track their charitable giving. But you'll see that we've expanded this global guide standard. So to put it into a single screen, the major differences is that a national regulation is no longer used. Local interpretations are no longer here, and we are making sure this is standardized. Secondly, a charitable purpose categorization is used, and this is again using the NTEE. And then third, certain categories may be excluded, like the example I gave about the religious organizations, as long as you are contributing to a charitable purpose, and even if it is a religious organization that is qualified. However, giving to religious organizations for the sake of performing religious services may be excluded, as well as professional associations, such as professional associations for teachers. Now, that leads to the question of what is the same? Well, great news. We are using the external credible taxonomy, as I mentioned earlier, the ICNPO. We're still using the broad coverage of charitable recipients, and that is the range of categories that you see, such as health, education, human services, etc. Public schools are included, and then all other government institutions are excluded. Heading to a reminder about total giving and about the question earlier of the attendee who asked about employee giving. Here's a reminder about all of the aspects that are not captured in total giving, but might be captured elsewhere in the annual Giving in Numbers survey. And this, again, is a carry-on over from the way it has been for the last couple of years. Contributions to government bodies are not included, which, again, with the exception of public schools. Contributions to for-profit entities, this would be the B Corps as well as the social enterprises. The management and program costs. If you are tracking the costs of running a specific program, grant program, volunteer program, all of that would be tracked in a different section under 5E. The value of volunteer time is actually tracked in a different section, in section 4 under employee engagement. Employee contributions, where this might be pertain to all of the matching gifts, would be captured also under section 4 of the employee engagement. Funds given by a corporate foundation where the source is not the parent company would be captured elsewhere, and that is because, as a reminder, when we talk about total giving, we are interested in capturing the giving of your company. And so even though you may have that information and we will capture and we will collect that data elsewhere, for the total giving, we're only looking for your company's contributions. And then finally, as always, contributions to individuals have been excluded. Just a reminder, if there is any question or any ambiguity over this section, you can always reach out to CCP. You can also report some of your concerns during the survey process in the notes section of the corresponding question. Another thing I'd like to add is that there is an available resource of a decision tree, and we do have the link posted on the lower right-hand corner of the PowerPoint, where if you have a specific grantee or a recipient and you're not quite sure if they meet one of the three criteria, or all three of the criteria, you can actually follow this decision tree. Pretty simple, and it'll help you get to your answer, and if not, you know that we're here to respond to you for that.
And Ginny, we've got a couple questions. We have one asking, would a membership in a 501c3 be included?
So that actually would have to depend on the organization itself. For example, we know that membership organizations do professional services such as law, so the American Bar Association, the American Medical Association, some of the teacher unions would not be counted, whereas your so-called affiliation with an organization like CCP would. So please reach out to us, and we would need a little more information before we can decide on that.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's all about the category of the organization as opposed to just whether or not they're a 501c3. And the other is, what about company matches for employee giving? Is that included? So the corporate portion of the match.
Yes, so that would be included. And again, if there are any questions about that, we can work through with you. Also, I should note that as you review any of our past publications of Giving in Numbers report, if there's a specific data point that you'd like further clarification on, and also details on what is included, please reach out to us. You've got myself, Carmen, and Andre to help and sort that out for you. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Carmen and ask about the benefits of using the Global Guide Standard now that all of you are well equipped to know the history as well as what it is.
Thank you, Ginny. So I think this has been an excellent walkthrough of all the different criteria in a really detailed way, which is exactly what we hope you'll do when you read that standard for the first time, to understand all the nuance of the different categories which are included, which are excluded, how the three criteria work together. And we will say that when companies have done that, as Ginny mentioned, the transition has been going on for a few years, we found that around 90% of companies found that their total giving remained unchanged in terms of that total dollar value. To build your confidence that this is highly aligned with the standard that you're used to in the past, but allows that growth and expansion as more and more companies are becoming global. And I think that's kind of the first benefit I want to mention, which is that we know that the global scope was in demand when we kicked off in this process, and we see that happening only more and more. Because CCP works exclusively with multi-billion-dollar companies, Giving in Numbers is companies minimum $2 billion or higher. These companies are all global. Even if the customer base is primarily or 100% in the U.S., the supply chain touches other countries. It's just the way of the world for these multi-billion-dollar companies. So that's one benefit, that we're matching the global scope that we see in our companies. Another key benefit is the ability to consistently track and benchmark, which we've talked about a bit on this presentation already. It also, a third benefit is that it creates a platform for understanding regional differences. So using a common standard allows, that common reporting, that apples-to-apples reporting, to really be able to draw out how our regions different around the world, and you see a lot of that in giving around the globe. Another benefit is that this can be a support for global strategizing. So I can give an example. A company asked CCP actually to join a call with people from different offices all around the world. So they were trying to roll up a global number, and we're having some internal debates about what counts and what doesn't. And the Global Guide Standard gave them a touchstone, a guidepost to say, this is a recognized and used international standard that we can compare with our work and see how we could consider what's included or excluded for our company. Of course, benchmarking is front and center for CACP, so once you've got that global standard in place, you can benchmark at the global level. And we started mentioning the importance of transparency. That's a major benefit for the field. Consumers will know more about the good work that companies are doing and how they're a force for good in society. And CCP does its part on the transparency front by producing the standard, but then also making sure to report back trends to the field through giving in numbers, through giving around the globe, and all the additional reports and releases that we're doing through CCP Insights and other places.
Okay, great. And I know that there are a couple of questions in the queue, so I have not forgotten about you. I do want to put up on the screen a couple of closing thoughts before our formal Q&A session, which is that, as you've heard, the Global Guide criteria is a benefit for all. Some of the resources that we mentioned, and I've also linked it here, is our Global Guide standard. It's also our 2016 survey evaluation guide, which is our full list of definitions and standards that we apply throughout our entire Giving Number survey, as well as throughout all of our trends and data insights. And then there's also the Global Guide to What Counts, which are the reports that Carmen mentioned. And also I should note that on your menu and your screen on your lower right-hand corner, there is a handout that I've already uploaded, which is a PDF, 3-page PDF, which also includes that decision tree that I had mentioned. Another reminder is that I will be holding another webinar on February 8th at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, about pro bono service and how it is reported as non-cash giving. So we'll be sharing some details with that along with a speaker from the Tapper Foundation. And then another reminder that the survey closes on Thursday, March 31st, 2016. Each company should have been notified of their survey deadline by our team. If you have not, or if you have any questions, you can always email me. And here's a link to get started with the survey. So now, to answer some questions that we've already received, let me go ahead and pull that up. So we've been asked about sponsorships paid to a Chamber of Commerce to sponsor a community event. So with sponsorships, as with the previous standard, is that as long as there is no direct benefit to the company, that can be counted. Now this question also asks about Chamber of Commerce, which would be excluded because of the government affiliation. So to answer this question simply about sponsorships paid to a Chamber of Commerce to sponsor a community event, that would be excluded. If it was sponsorship paid to a qualified recipient, the fair market value or the deduction of the benefit that was paid back or given back to your company would be deducted. So for example, if tickets were purchased to a gala, the cost of the ticket would, or the cost of the benefit received for the cost of the dinner, and whatever else, other perks that might come with the attendance of that event should be deducted, and therefore the remainder would be considered charitable. And then I asked, and I would be happy to follow up and share more details with the person who had asked. The next question was, would a state organization such as the State Conservation Department be excluded? And the answer would be yes, it would be excluded because it is a government institution. And another question about private colleges, would they not be counted? And that is correct, they would not be counted because they would not be considered for a charitable purpose using the existing taxonomies endorsed by the UN. Now, as we wait for additional questions, I wanted to
can I add one point to that, Jenny?
Absolutely.
So on the question related to the State Department for Conservation, we are actually exploring a new pilot inquiry around what we're calling Good Beyond Giving. So we are looking to make sure that the areas like that that are not captured in total giving or not captured elsewhere in the existing study can be explored in greater depth. So I will be reaching out to you directly to let you know more details about that, and if anyone else would like to plug into that process, you can certainly reach out to anyone on our team here so we can make sure you're involved. So it's really important to pay attention to the total giving definition and then know that CCP is sort of thinking more broadly to capture that new growing area.
Great, thank you, Carmen. Now I'd like to turn it over to Andre to ask for another insight from our recent Giving in Numbers survey, and asking, now that we've gone full circle with the global guide criteria, we've gone into the details of what's included, excluded, and then now we've had several different questions asking about the specifics. Andre, tell us, why is this important in the context of companies that are going global and growing internationally?
Thank you, Jeannie. I think it's very important, more than ever, to have a global guide standard as companies become more global, because also their international giving increases. As we can see, among companies who gave internationally, 21% of total giving actually went to international end recipients. We define international end recipients as recipients outside of the headquarters of the company. So that's one of the reasons why it is important to have a global guide criteria. And that helps ensure we are reporting apples to apples, as you mentioned before, for all companies. With this, we are able to compare different recipients from around the globe. Also, among companies who gave internationally, as we mentioned, 21% of their total giving actually went to international end recipients. We have from this table how international giving was distributed across different industries. And we can see from here that the communications industry actually gave almost 30% of their total giving to international end recipients, followed by consumer staples and technology.
Okay, thank you, Andre. That's really good to see that in the context of companies, and looking at a trend like this where it's the full data set of companies reporting, and that we see a 21%, that's pretty noteworthy. I do want to go back to the earlier question about the private college and why it would be excluded in total giving. Just to clarify, even though the charitable purpose is education, it would actually not meet our third criteria about ensuring that there are no distribution of profits. And with the private colleges, because there is that commercial motive, it would actually exclude that specific type of organization. So again, I just want to repeat, this is a repeat slide of what we had earlier. And it looks like we are at the end of our questions and the near end of our time with the webinar. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and to keep in mind that we, as the Evaluation and Data Insights team, are here to answer your questions, to support you in any sort of strategy that you might need help expanding, promoting, changing, and that we hope to continue engaging with you. And with that, we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, everybody.